Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Korra comic review. This is going to be my non-spoiler review for Legend of Korra Turf Wars Part 2. Going to be kind of splitting this up just because I only recently read it, so I definitely feel like I need some time to fully compile my thoughts. But I definitely have some initial reactions and some little points to discuss here. So I'll try to keep the spoilers to a minimum here and just kind of keep it more general. So overall, how is Turf Wars Part 2? I'd say it's overall a better book than Part 1, but I question how much that actually means because of how middle of the road Part 1 was, and then this just being slightly better than average. I think it still ends up being a very average book. The problem I have with it is that while yes, it's not as Korra focused and it's much more plot focused, I don't think many of the plots are all that interesting, or at the very least, the way they've tried to tackle them, they haven't made them all that interesting. And what I mean by that is that the plots we obviously get into are Julie becomes a candidate for the presidency, running against Raiko, and I think the problem with that is just that I think the issue of how they're characterizing Raiko really comes into play now, and I really don't know what they're doing, because the problem with the arc in terms of it not being very interesting is that Raiko is just being presented as being so much the bad guy that you are not meant to care about him. You want anyone but Raiko to be the next president. So Julie being basically convinced to run for president here, it's just like, okay, so she's going to become the next president, in that there's nothing to make you believe she won't become the president. Unless they suddenly go overboard with Raiko in the next book and have him do all this kind of political undermining stuff and trying to really turn people against Julie. I don't know why it's all that interesting, because it feels like the way they have it set up now, it's that Julie's going to be the president, and I don't see any way where Raiko gets any sort of support, because the way they present him here is just so underhanded and so unlikable. And I talked about this in Part 1. I don't think I got a lot of traction with Part 1 for some reason, but it's been something I've noticed in Turf Wars, is just that they're very much leaning into Raiko is not a particularly good person or anything like that, or that they're presenting him that way. And while I think he brings up some interesting points at times, like he does bring up the point of like, while all this craziness is going on, you went on a vacation, and he's not trying to make it about like the nature of Korra's relationship, but just the fact that what happened at the end of book 4 was that the city was still left in a bit of a mess, and Korra left the city as it was without helping and then returned. I can understand that perspective. The problem is obviously he makes all these other kind of things where he tries to blame Korra for everything that's happened, and then constantly like wants Korra to do something, but then also doesn't want her to do anything. So it's very back and forth about like, okay, Raiko, what way do you actually want to go about things here? You're very much just doing this for yourself. And then with Julie, it's just like, okay, she cares about people. I like that, we're getting a little bit more development with her. You get a very good scene with Julie and Varric. That's one of the highlights of the book, I think, is the Julie-Varric conversation, where she gets some confidence to fully commit to running for president. That was well done. But I don't know how much of a role this arc is going to play, because it really feels like it's just, we'll end this Turf Wars and Julie will be the president and Raiko will be off doing whatever. Similarly with the triad stuff, I talked about this a little bit in relation to Part 1 and just how, really, this is the plot. This is the plot they're going for the continuation comics of Korra. It's triad turf war stuff. It's just not that interesting. Part of it is that, one, they've got rid of most of the triads, and what they've done is basically the triple threats are like kind of this amalgamation of all of the other triads, and then there's also the Creeping Crystal triad, which are like the only other opposition triad. And there's a turf war battle, even though there's only 2 triads, and I'm really unclear about what exactly the aim of Tokuga is, because I still don't feel he's a particularly interesting villain. They roughly explain how he's changed by his spirit kind of morphing, but it's nothing like overly kind of like detailed or anything like that. They don't go into any sort of depth in the way that I think we'd want. It's literally just, okay, he's kind of more powerful now and he's smarter now because of this, and there's not that big of a drawback outside of the fact that he seems to scare people. He's still blaming Korra for some reason for what happened to him, and he's just a little bit more intelligent at planning things now. I still don't know what his motivation is as such, and again, just because the aim is just Triad Turf War stuff, it's just like, this was like, there was a reason where the Triad stuff was like the most sub of the subplots in The Legend of Korra Book 1. It's because while an interesting idea to add to the series, Triad gangs, making it the focus, isn't the most kind of interesting thing overall. And I suppose where we're leading into a part 3, like, yeah, there's going to be some big moments, I assume, just because they've set things up to be somewhat dramatic. But is it just going to go back to the way it was in like book 2, 3, and 4, where the triads weren't really a factor once again, and we're kind of back to square one, and we've just dealt with different triads? I think the big issue really comes down to how this book is trying to tackle the spirit world conflict. The start of it makes you believe that, like, oh, they're finally going to get into this, but then it's all from human perspective, and I think this is the problem. And it's obviously something I talk about a lot, because I've obviously talked about how the thing I'm most interested in with the spirit world stuff is exploring the spirit side of things, of why they care about being in the physical world, why they're not basically just set and like okay with just being in the spirit world, why they feel a connection here, and what their aim is and stuff like that. Just learning more about spirit culture, just what their aims are, anything like that. What is the meaning of life in a way for spirits? The sort of questions that we just don't really know because they've kept them overly mysterious. Because the big problem I have with it is that you have certain characters, mainly the airbenders, but also Korra as well to a degree, like stepping over themselves, like just to make sure that, oh, we have to respect the spirits. We have to do everything to make sure the spirits are respected. We have to fix what the spirits have got angry about. And it's all this like pandering to the spirits without really kind of asking yourself, like, why? Like, Korra, like, for you, what have the spirits done for you to make you want to get their respect so much? They've in a way disrespected you because you've asked them nicely for help. They haven't. They returned to the city the second the conflict ended, and now they're annoyed again that people are coming into the spirit portal. I don't get why she's so... I get as the Avatar she wants to keep the peace between both sides, but it's so much from like, okay, the humans are going to do everything for the spirits, and then no one is like asking the spirits to like really show any sort of equality in this. And that's the issue I think that they're struggling with in this comic, in that I get the feeling like they feel that they can't really develop the spirits all that much, so they have to do the whole human-spirit conflict purely from the human side, which doesn't need to be the case, in that just bring back the likes of an Ai, or develop this dragon eel spirit thing more, and have him be the real spokesperson for the spirits as he's sort of been up to now, but develop him more. Explain why some spirits have even come to live in the city for the first place. Go in depth about why they don't want to get involved in the conflict, yet they attacked Tokugo when he came. What's the idea here? There needs to be, I think, a bigger world building reveal about what exactly is going on here, because as it is, it feels a little bit too much like the kind of spirit of humans is that they're always going to destroy nature, and because of that, the spirits are always correct about these type of things, and it's always the humans who are going to have to make up for whatever is going on. And it makes it feel such an imbalanced thing of just humans doing everything wrong, and then the spirits are just sitting there like, yep, we're going to live in your home, you can't come into our place. And I think that's one of the things that they have to develop. And in the preview pages, early on in the book, we saw, when in the spirit world, in the place where Korra and Asami went to in part 1, the spirits have destroyed their own kind of beautiful nature in the where the new spirit portal opens up. Why have they done that? Why do they feel okay with doing that? If they're so for nature, why are they destroying their own nature just to keep humans away? Why do they hate humans so much? Because I think it comes back to the Wan stuff again. And Wan, at the time, I think was correct to separate humans and spirits, just because of the situation humans were in. Let's not forget, humans had to live on the backs of lion turtles because spirits had all of the spirit world, but they also basically were living over the entire landscape of the physical world as well. And the only way to really solve that was to allow humans to, I think, re-establish themselves in the physical world, and have the spirits just maintain their realm. Now that things are coming back together, there needs to be this sort of a shift. And I think in a way the spirits should be a little bit more open to trying with humans, because in a way they sort of caused humanity such a problem back before. And that's the problem. It's just, it feels like the spirits aren't necessarily characters because we don't know them all that well. We don't know what they're about, who they are, what their goals, aims are, just that they need to be respected because they're spirits. And as much as Korra has done an excellent job over the run of the show of, I think, giving us more insight into spirits and establishing all these sort of connections, it's still a big question of, like, what is the dynamic? And I think they're missing the mark by only focusing on one side of things at the moment. And it means that most of the plot points in Turf Wars are just, there's an interest to them all. I think there is, like the presidential election, cool, but they're making it so one-sided that, like, Julie is the only candidate, and Raiko, unless he goes full evil next book and is really trying to go underhanded and to try and win the election, I really question what on earth they're trying to do there, because it's just, why not just say Julie's running and just make it very clear she's going to win and leave it at that? Don't make it a plot point, just accept that it's going to happen, because we never saw Raiko, why he was elected. I think looking back on it now, it seems like he was probably one of the only candidates, or at the very least one of the only non-Bender candidates, and because he was elected during the gap between book 1 and book 2, it would make sense with the anti-Bender sentiment that a non-Bender was elected, even maybe if he wasn't the best candidate. But again, use flashback, explain that. Maybe go back and explain that he's actually not a very good politician and he just got into power because of, like, what was happening at the time. Something like that. I think Raiko needs a little bit of backstory. Unless you're going to go down the road of basically saying, like, his campaign manager is, like, manipulating him somehow and he's actually an okay person. It feels like President Moon is going to happen at some point. The triad stuff, like, obviously we're dealing with, like Tokuga manipulating Wan Young-Kum, and he has this sort of power now, and he's making these other moves while trying to, like, keep the triad together. There's elements of it that are okay, in that you get some of the other members of the Triple Threats kind of talking and about how, like, they had trust in their previous leaders, even though they weren't perfect people, Lightning Bolt, Zolt, Viper. But the members of the triad always knew that those leaders cared about them to a degree. Whereas they don't feel that way about Tokuga as the new guy, especially as he is now. And you see him kind of, you know, throwing his weight around his extra power now that he's kind of half spirit, to kind of gain control over this. And he's making some big moves, but it just feels flat, because fundamentally it's just, okay, this thing's happened and Korra needs to resolve this. Like, we know from, of course, the preview for part 3, Asami gets kidnapped. It's not a spoiler. And it's just like, okay, like, what are we doing here? Is Asami being kidnapped going to give Asami an opportunity to develop as a character? Or is Korra going to go through more development to get to the point where she can get Asami back? It's just not, like I said before, it's a case of, why is this the plot point to the continuation of Korra? Like, I get some people were perhaps saying this about The Promise when The Promise came out as the first Avatar comic. But I think what was happening in The Promise was much more interesting than this, because we're dealing with the early stages of, you know, the nations coming together and United Republic on the verge of forming. Here, we can do anything because we don't know what happens next. Whereas in Avatar, we sort of know that we have to transition from here to here. Whereas with Korra, we're just going from end of show to wherever. They can do anything. It's completely open. Why is the Triads the first arc? Because it's not like they have to diminish the arc so much because like Korrasami has to be a big focus. Because it's not really that big of a thing here. There's of course some cute Korrasami moments and some of it's pretty well done. But nothing, I think, as impactful as part one. It's just kind of, I think, more of the same. I don't feel we got any deeper insight into their relationship here. And again, I think the problem, same as part one, is that Asami is the one who feels underdeveloped as a character. It feels like they have to use Korra's very well developed character to create any sort of a dynamic between the two of them, whereas Asami is just like, she's a businesswoman. She's a non-bender fighter who can handle herself. That's like more or less all there is to her right now, except now she's in a relationship with Korra. And it feels like they're really struggling to make her interesting. And that's where they need to do something with her in part 3. And I think develop some of her flaws so that it's not always a case of Asami noticing that Korra's, recklessness tending to jump into action. Asami kind of dealing with one of Korra's flaws. What about Korra dealing with Asami's flaws? When is that going to happen? Because it feels like it's just the two characters are on just two completely different levels of like how well we know them. And Korra just dominates everything in every scene we're in. Which is no problem, but we're trying to develop a relationship here, and I feel like we only know one of the characters in the relationship on this personal level. And I think that's where, as the comics continue with Korra, I think you do need to go do stuff like maybe give Asami a little bit of a flashback. Show Yasuko, her mother, and how similar or dissimilar Asami is to her mother. That sort of stuff. Like, expand on the fact that, I think use maybe the fact that she's on her own, like her family is gone, and she very much relies more on her friends now. Use that a bit more. Where I feel like if there's anything that they sort of leaned into it with this book, is that I think they were trying to establish maybe that Asami maybe relies a little bit too much on the I can handle myself stuff, in that Korra specifically says, I'll like get some people to kind of watch out for you, or I'll stick around you and watch out for you. And she says like, no, I don't need your help. And of course she gets kidnapped anyway. So, is that what they're trying to point out? That, she's trying too hard to maybe not make it so that she doesn't ever feel like she has to, ask for help and feel like she's underpowered and that she is powerful herself. Is it something like that? I'm not entirely sure, but I suppose the other thing is the art. I think the art is very similar to part one, where I think at times it is very good. I like the background stuff. And individual panels themselves, I think, are well done. I think the action that she does is very well done. The main problem, again, is just inconsistency. Just panel to panel, page to page. You don't know if there's going to be any sort of continuity of just the faces looking the same, the size of specific parts of their faces looking the same, characters looking completely different at different angles depending on what the panel is asking the artist to actually draw. It's not so big of a problem that it just ruins the book, but it is, I think, a noticeable flaw with the art, that it is quite inconsistent, that characters at times just look completely different to other panels, and it's somewhat distracting. As I said, I think it's more good than bad, but it's obviously something that would help the book if it was more consistent. But part of that also could be from the fact that we as Avatar fans are used to Team Gurihuru, who are like the most consistent artists like I've almost ever seen, and anything that's not as good as that kind of looks kind of very inconsistent in comparison. But still, I think it's a valid complaint that the art isn't perfect, but there are still good elements to it, that's for sure. Other than that, I think that's all I really want to say here. Just that, for me, I had hopes that part 2 would really move Turf Wars into, I think, being a good book. I unfortunately think that it just kept it on more or less the same level, where yes, we've got the plot developed, but the plot is still quite average, and it overall makes the book still feel quite average, and that's how it comes across. Obviously, I have hope that part 3 will do some big things. Even when part 3s aren't perfect, they tend to have something of note. But I'm not really sure where we're leading to here. It depends on how to tackle all of the plots. But any final thoughts? Mako and Bolin are in the book a little bit more. I think Bolin is well written in the scenes that he's in, but I don't feel like they're doing anything particularly notable with him. Mako, I actually liked a couple of the scenes with him in that they're very much establishing that he is a very, 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 very solid cop, and he is very much helping Bolin to become a better cop himself. And hopefully we see that progress. We see Mako, you really step into the kind of spotlight coming forward, and we get some focus on him. They continued on with the idea of like he's still a little, he's still, I think, trying to deal with the fact that he's found out that Korra and Asami are together now, which I'm okay with how they did it. I was worried they'd go way overboard with it, but thankfully it's more of just characters like thinking maybe he has more of a problem with it than he actually does. You definitely get the sense it's going to take him a little bit of time to fully accept it, but that there's no inherent problem, I suppose, with him and in Korra and Asami being in a relationship. It's probably going to take a scene towards the end of the book of him going up to them and saying that, and almost, I think, telling them something like that, where like, look, this is a bit of a shock. It's going to take a little bit of time for me to, get my head around this, but I am happy for the two of you. Something along those lines, I think, would be a perfect way to just, have it be like a natural reaction of Mako of just like, yeah, he is a little bit taken aback that this is the thing, but that he actually is okay with it. I think that's the best way to go with it. But yeah, that's been the non-spoiler review. Again, probably sometime in the middle of next week I'll do a more detailed spoiler-focused review. And then the plan is that we do the podcast review next Sunday. And so on, and I'll try and get a written review up on the site as well at that time. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the book Turf Wars Part 2. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.